Hi, my forensic science students. We are going to be learning about hair for the next 2 weeks. I'm working through chapter 3 out of your textbook. It starts on page 50, and it starts off with a little case of a gentleman who was accused of murder, and they used hair evidence, and it was one of the very first times that they used this type of hair analysis to solve a crime. So you're going to want to start on that page 50 and read that. But most importantly, this week we have a PowerPoint that we're working through. So I'm going to just share the screen, and I kind of want to walk you through this PowerPoint. So this week, morphology of hair, its hair form and structure. We'll just do a quick little background on hair. We'll take a look at its structure and then the types of medulla patterns. So our background information, the average human body has about 5 million hairs. Kind of gross to think about it. There are 5 million hairs on your body. Now, there are certainly some people out there who seem like they are a lot hairier and other people who don't have as much hair. But I'm not talking about thick, coarse hair. I'm talking about that fine, downy-like hair that's all over your entire body. 5 million. If we take a look at our 3 major hair colors, we have red, blonde, and dark hair, like brown or black. I had always assumed that redheads would have more hairs on their head than anybody else. And I always just assumed that blonde hair was much thinner than red or a brown or a black hair. But statistically, what we find is that people who have naturally blonde hair have about 120,000 hairs on their head. Excuse me. Whereas we find red hair has only about 80,000 hairs on their head, and brown to black hair about 100,000 hairs. Now, maybe blonde-haired people have more physical hairs, but you have to keep in mind that not everybody's hair shaft is going to be exactly the same size. So it could be that blonde hairs are just narrower in diameter. Your hair is continuously falling out. You lose about 100 hairs off of your head every 24 hours. And in this little picture down below, you're just looking at the 4 stages of a hair. When hair is nice and healthy and it's grown in, you can tug on your hair and it doesn't come out. That's called the anagen stage. And as the hair starts to get older, it moves into the catagen. It says the hair roots start degenerating. Eventually, that hair, it can no longer hold onto your scalp. That's the telogen phase. And when that hair completely falls out, a new tiny little hair is already growing where the old hair was. It's like it pushes it right out. Locard's exchange principle. This is an important idea. Locard said that when 2 people struggle, each is likely to leave hair on the other. Now, not just hair, we're going to find that fiber, skin, DNA, saliva, spit. Anytime there is a struggle between 2 people, there's always going to be a transfer of evidence. Hair is a very easy thing to get left behind, especially if you're losing 100 hairs a day. A few years ago, I remember my students talking about passing in the halls and the number of people that you run into and bump into when you're walking from class to class. Think about how many hairs fall on you from other people if they're losing 100 hairs a day. This is just taking a little look at a diagram of the hair. Top layer of the skin is called the epidermis. Way down below is the dermis. And in between the two, hopefully you remember there's that papillae layer. And that papillae layer is what causes the fingerprints to push up through. That papillae layer keeps the epidermis and the dermis attached. It's almost like Velcro, which keeps them stuck together. Now the hair goes deep down into your skin. The follicle is one, we call it the follicle once it's below the skin. And the sebaceous glands, these provide oil so that the hair can slide through the opening to break through your skin. Way down below, down here, the root of a hair follicle, I think I'm going to call it like the bulb. The hair's roots are embedded in the follicle, and the follicle is linked to the body's blood supply. So what that means is if a hair is linked to the body's blood supply, if that hair is forcibly removed, guess what it can bring with it? I'm sure some of you are saying, blood. Well, sure. And what's in that blood is DNA. This can be important for analyzing hair for drugs and poisons. So poisons and drugs that are in your bloodstream will get transferred up through that hair. And many a case has been solved as somebody was poisoned to death over a period of time because those poisons showed up in the hair shaft. So the hair shaft is composed of three parts: this cuticle, the cortex, and the medulla. And in a minute, we'll take a little look at what those three different parts are in the structure of the hair. All right, in our diagram here, the top right corner, we've got a side view of the hair, and the outer edge is called the cuticle. And the cuticle is like a series of scales kind of layered on top of each other. They're almost on there like shingles, and they're pointing in one direction. Inside of the hair shaft, it's called the cortex, and the cortex contains the color of your hair. And then the very, very center, running down the center, there is a string of cells, and it usually looks like a black line, and that's called the medulla. A cross section of the hair, in this diagram to the left, you can see that the cuticle is just a very thin layer around the outside. The cortex, the color part, is in the middle, and then the centermost part is the medulla, and again, that is a string of cells. Now, hair by itself, a hair that has naturally fallen out, is not going to contain DNA. And you might be saying, well, if there's cells in the medulla, they must have DNA. These cells are not containing the DNA that can link a hair to a specific person. These are just these medullary cells. And you can see in the diagram on the right, these little things, these shingles or these scales on the side, those are the scales that make up the cuticle. So taking a close-up look at the cuticle, these kind of look gross. They almost look like the legs of a bug, but this is really the cuticle. This is one of your hairs. So it's a series of scales or layers on the outside of the hair shaft. The cuticle is unique to the species. So all humans have a similar cuticle, whereas all cats have a very specific cuticle pattern. And not this week, but next week, you'll be looking at specific animals and trying to identify their different cuticles, medullas, and cortexes. It says the cuticle is unique to the species. However, hair is considered class evidence. It's not individual. We can't say this hair with 100% certainty goes with this person. We can just say this person has hair that is similar to a hair that was found at the crime. Maybe we know it's a human hair and it came off of somebody who has red hair, but as we all know, it's very easy to change the color of our hair. We see a healthy cuticle in the pictures here on the bottom to the left. Raised cuticle layer. These cuticles have been kind of popped up. Anybody who's ever had a perm, not that people get perms too often anymore, but if your hair is permed, they actually raise the cuticle up. If you get your hair colored, That cuticle gets lifted up so that the color can get deposited inside. And our picture on the right here, it shows damaged cuticle. And that could be hair that has been subjected to a flat iron, to a blow dryer, or just hair that hasn't been trimmed in a long time. So the cuticle, got a picture here of orangutan cuticles. You can see how tightly they're kind of layered together, whereas the cuticle of a cat looks more like an asparagus to me. Moving on to the cortex. The cortex is made up of keratin, which is a protein, and it contains the pigments that give hair its color. When you choose to go to a salon and have your hair professionally dyed, they take and they raise up those scales and they deposit the color deep inside the cortex. That's why hair color, professional hair coloring, can last a much longer time than some of the not permanent dyes that people use. It says an absence of pigment results in hair being either gray or white. And then the third part of the hair, the third and final part, is called the medulla. And the medulla is this string of cells running down the center of the hair. Now, not every hair you see is going to have a medulla. And if the hair does have medulla, sometimes it's a solid medulla. Sometimes it's intermittently broken up, no pattern. Other times it's broken up in a very distinct pattern. On your head, you could look at 3 different hairs and have 3 different medullas. So the medulla pattern they're showing you here: absent, continuous, interrupted, fragmented. And over on the right-hand side, they're showing you a stacked medulla. Humans can have all of these different types of medullas. However, animals have continuous or stacked medullas. Most humans have absent or fragmented. However, most Native Americans have a continuous medulla. Just a diagram showing you 5 types of human medulla when you are looking at some samples. Some different species. Dogs have a unique medulla. Look at the deer medulla. Look at how wide it is. Mouse looks like a bunch of watermelon seeds. And a cat has a stacked medulla, and a rabbit. So they're showing you human medulla may be continuous, fragment, or absent. This is in animals over on the right-hand side, and the left-hand side is a human. Note how much thicker the animal's medulla is compared to the entire diameter of the hair versus the human medulla. A human medulla is much, much narrower, much thinner than an animal medulla. So even if you are just taking a quick look under a microscope, you can usually tell if hair is human versus animal just by the thickness of the medulla. Talking a little bit about hair removal. If you naturally are losing hairs because it's gone through those 4 stages, naturally shed hairs, look at that root bulb on the end. It looks like the tip of a Q-tip, and that right there is an indicator that it has naturally fallen out. If, however, the hair has been forcibly yanked out, that bulb gets stretched out as it's getting yanked out of the head. So hair found at a crime scene, if it's been forcibly removed, gives you a bit of an idea that there was some kind of a struggle. And it says forcibly removed hairs may have tissue attached. And if tissue is attached, chances are pretty good you can get some DNA. And then you can say this hair with 100% certainty goes with that person. The medullary index we will tackle next week. This is just a quick, simple little math formula. You measure the diameter of the medulla, you divide it by the diameter of the hair, and you're going to get some number less than 1. If it's human, that number is going to be less than 0.33. If it's an animal, it's going to be greater than 0.5. So 0.5 up to like 0.99999. There are a number of things that we can learn from hair samples. We can tell its location. I mean to creep you out, but we can tell if it's pubic hair versus beard hair versus hair on your head. You can tell the racial origin of hair. We can tell if it's animal versus human hair. We can tell if it's treated hair, if it's been dyed, and if the color is natural or unnatural. We can tell, excuse me, if the hair color is natural. We can tell if it's been forcefully removed or if it naturally fell out. And I'm going to save this video until next week. Obviously, if we were back in class, you would be creating wet mount slides of all the different hair samples. While we're on e-learning, you're going to have to do a little digging around on the internet. So that's about all that I have for this week. You're going to be taking the guided notes, filling them in from this PowerPoint, which is on my class page. You're going to read a couple case studies on page, I think it was 61 and 62, and then just answer a quick little discussion question. All right, stop into office hours if you have any specific questions. Hopefully I will see you. Have a good week.